Today we will be looking into the Italian game, learning how to play it, and this is one of the most popular openings for white, played by some of the top grandmasters as well. So this is a very, very useful opening to know about, and we are going to go ahead and dive right into it right here, right now, starting with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. We play bishop c4 here, and black's got a few options here, but to play into the Italian game, they want to go bishop c5, and this is where we are going to start our main discussions here. So a lot of people, when they first learn chess and openings, will play knight c3 or they'll castle in some order, and you'll get a very generic position like this. It's basically copycat chess, maybe castles, d3, maybe they'll go h6 or d6, and you get it's a very basic position and you don't have that much play. Despite this being a very, very common position, it's just completely even, and would not recommend playing it if you want to play for a win. Those games are very difficult to win, just very evenly balanced. If you want to play something a bit more interesting, that's why we are here. All right, I'm going to suggest c3 right here. Okay, and the idea is, well, you're controlling d4 and you're thinking maybe you'll put your pawn there, or just the fact that your c3 pawn is now covering that square is huge for you. It's possible you're looking at the b4 square as well. Maybe you'll push that pawn in some of these lines that we will get to. For the time being, if they play knight f6, that is the best move. There isn't really another great option for them. And now we've got options. All right, mainly the two ideas that we want to look into. Option one would be d4, and that's the more exciting option of the two. Really open things up and see if you can get it tactical. Option two would be d3, and that is generally regarded as the more solid option of the two. They are both very good. They have both been played by the strongest players in the world, and you can't really go wrong. This is more of a style preference. Which move, which positions are going to suit you better personally. And we'll take a look at both of these. We're going to start with d4. And here, you're attacking the bishop, you're attacking the center pawn. They don't have much of a choice here. They either take or they get taken. So you need to take. We're going to take back with our pawn. And this is very appealing to us to have two pawns in the center right here. If they make the wrong move, say they go bishop b6, a fair amount of people do that, then you're just left with two pawns in the center. Very, very nice position to have. You could even push one of them on the next turn, and then these knights are both a little bit unhappy to be in this spot, right? You're going to have to go to some unfortunate squares. But most of the time, people know what to do here, and they give the check. And this is the first big choice we have out of this d4 line. And how do you block the check? If you block with knight c3, that is the more fun option. If you block with the bishop, we'll dive into this one first. It's not going to take us too long. I do not advise this. It is arguably the best move in this position. The problem with it, in deeper theory, is if they go knight takes pawn, you've got to trade on b4, and then you have this nice bishop takes f7 check tactic, followed by queen b3 check to win your piece back. So this ensures that you're not going to be down any material. And also, their king is on a weird square, unable to castle. We throw in knight e5 check. Their best move is king d6, and we take our knight. And at first glance, this looks like a pretty good position, right? I mean, we have our queen out on active square. Material is even. Their king is on e6. But this is completely even, and the reason why is they play queen f8. Right? They threaten a queen trade, and they threaten to take on f2. And we can't guard f2 without trading queens, basically. So we're going to trade here. They're going to take. And we could go on and on in this line, but unfortunately, this is very, very difficult to win. It says it is ever so slightly better for white. I would even put black's winning chances higher here because we have an isolated center pawn, so that could be a long-term target. And if you think their king being on e6 is a problem, it's sadly not. We have no way to go after the king. It can really just rest there as long as it wants to. It could move on over to d6 to let the bishop out soon. So this is playable if you want to kind of grind it out here and just try to play really, really solid and very careful. But if you're going for solid and careful, I would still not recommend this exact line to you. I wouldn't play d4 on move 5 to begin with. So we're gonna take it back to the position where they put you in check. That's if you block with the bishop. They can force that very boring, very even line. If you want better winning chances, you want to have some more fun, open it up some more, I would recommend blocking with the knight here. And now there are There's just the one main move they play here. They're gonna take your pawn because they can, and you're gonna castle here. So you've got some rook e1 ideas basically. If they're not careful, now their knight is also hanging. You got out of the pin, so they are likely going to take on c3. The only question is how. And we'll look at both real quick because one is good and one is, well, not so good. So knight takes is the not so good way to play it, and I'm gonna show you the top continuation for white and the most played moves for black. We're going to take back, and almost always they're going to take the pawn because that's a free pawn after all. And the trick we have here is we're going to go queen b3, and then large majority of the time they're going to take the hanging rook, and that's their mistake. All right, we take on f7 with check. They move their king to f8. If they go to e7, bring your rook to e1 and force the king to f8. But they go to f8, we bring out bishop g5, and of course, the queen is trapped, and the only way they're saving the queen is by playing knight e7. And then we can follow that up with knight e5. And we've got a really, really nice idea here where we're going to play bishop g6, and then queen f7 is the checkmating threat with our knight and bishop both attacking that square. So most people have played bishop takes pawn here. So for example, we get this position. They're up 7 points of material here. Kind of ridiculous, but white is completely winning here. We play bishop g6. And the only move that keeps them from getting checkmated really quickly would be putting the pawn on d5. And here we just bring our queen on over. They're going to have to block that check. If they block with the knight, the queen is hanging. If they block with the bishop, well, I suppose we would just take it. If they take back, then again, the queen is just hanging on d8 here. Well, they get the bishop, but still, they're not moving the knight. That's a big problem for them. So instead, maybe they take our knight here. We go bishop e6 check, and look at that. If they move the king, we have queen to f7, which would be checkmate. So here they are going to have to block probably with the bishop. They could block with the knight instead, but they lose their queen. We take, and they're running out of options at this point. If they recapture, we go here with our queen. We're going to checkmate them on f7 really quickly. They're completely lost at this point. Maybe they try to run. We take the pawn. This is a checkmating threat. The rook is hanging on h8. And this turned out really, really well for us. So I'm going to go back all the way here to get back into this position. So that's a pretty interesting line. They take, we castle. None of that is forced, but that is by far the most popular continuation, which is why a lot of people do enjoy playing knight c3. It got kind of crazy, and they got really, really good winning chances. But if they have seen this before and they know what they're doing, they will know to take with the bishop. All right, and on this, we don't have the same sort of tricks. We're just going to recapture. They are going to probably play knight takes c3, but then we have queen e1 check. So if we get here, we're pretty happy with the fork on the king and the knight. But what if they know better than to do that? What if they know to play d5? It makes it a little bit tougher, but we retreat. They likely will castle. We can bring our queen to c2 and rook to e1 really quickly. And this is going to be a difficult position. Have no doubt about that. This is not super pleasant. But you get here, at least your pieces are going to be pretty active and pretty good. If we follow the top line, it goes something like this. And maybe this rook is coming to b1 soon. And this is slightly better for black only because they're up a pawn. But we have enough here to justify it. But long term, you're going to need black to make a mistake to get winning chances. So all in all, you can take your chances with knight c3, and you can have a really good shot at just having a lot going on in the center, having a really exciting game. Another thing, actually, if they go knight takes e4 and you castle, and they take this way, another thing would be to just not recapture. For example, you could play d5 in this position. And this is where it gets just really crazy, because it looks like everything's going to be hanging. The knight's hanging, the bishop's hanging. If the bishop moves, there's rook e1 pinning the knight. What is going on here? There's a lot to break down from here. I'm just going to give you the most popular move by a good bit. It's bishop f6. And here you do not take the knight. You play rook e1. They often will castle or go knight e7 in some order. Now the knight's in danger here. They're going to move it. And so the idea, if we put in a few more moves, we go d6. If they don't take it, then it's a little unpleasant. They take it. We do not recapture. Our point of doing that was basically to open up the diagonal for the bishop. Now we bring our bishop to g5. They very likely are taking that trade, but the whole point of this is our pieces are very, very active, and we actually are going to have some play in this line. Even though we are technically down 2 pawns, they are doubled pawns on the d-file. The d7 pawn cannot move, and it blocks in the bishop. The d6 pawn isn't in a hurry to move. If it does, it gets captured. And all of our pieces are coming out. All of our pieces are going to active squares. So a lot of people do enjoy playing this line once they've learned it. It's just a lot to be familiar with. And of course, back here, when we play d5 to begin with, there's no guarantee they play bishop f6. I mean, it's possible they go knight e5, or maybe they move this knight back to d6 or f6. Maybe they just ignore you entirely and they castle. So there's a lot you would have to learn in order to play this way. So it's really messy. Maybe they play, say they play knight e5, and I think now you were supposed to take the bishop, and you're gonna hope that you go rook e1 or queen e1 and get some play on the e-file. But they take the bishop here. Rook e1 is an option now. Here you might actually want to go queen d4 and attack the 2 knights. Castles here, knight d6, and we're getting into a bit of a messy game. So these are totally playable positions. You can look at the evaluation bar there saying it's a little better for black. You can look at the material count and say that black is up a pawn, but a common theme in these positions is white has the much more active position, and your pieces are going to get out, and you're going to be able to make something happen, build up some play, come up with plans, and it's going to be worth being down a pawn. So if you are looking for positions where you can play for activity, even at the cost of a pawn, this is definitely for you. Now, for those of you who are not into that, let me take you back to move 4, and let's look at our other option. It's completely different, opposite style of play. Instead of d4, we played d3. All right, so big difference. Now we aren't threatening anything. We're just guarding our center pawn, and, well, that's basically it. We guard the center pawn. Our bishop is able to come out if it wants to. But note here, that's often not what's going to happen. Let's see. I'm going to give you the most common move at this point, which is d6. So guarding their pawn, and maybe their bishop is going to come out. And we want to follow up with castles. And oftentimes, if we follow the top continuation here, people love to go bishop g4. This is extremely common in this position, in these lines. They go bishop g4 to pin your knight. And we do have a pretty good plan following up with this. We're going to go knight d2, connecting our knights. And we don't really have to worry about them ever taking the knight. It's not going to be a big deal. If they give up the bishop for a knight that wasn't going to do anything anyway, we will be okay with that. Oftentimes, people will castle here. Makes sense. Go ahead and play h3 to kick the bishop out. Almost everyone's going to retreat to h5 thinking they still have the pin. And this is normally an idea in the beginner positions of the Italian game where you have your knight in c3 instead of the pawn, and they can play towards knight d4, attacking the pinned knight. But that's not a thing here because we played c3 earlier. So there's no knight d4, there's no true threat on f3, you're completely fine. And we do have a very interesting plan here. So we're going to play rook e1, and the idea is to follow up with knight f1, knight g3. We're going after the bishop there, and they can't do anything to stop us from playing these moves, not really. So that is the plan we have in mind. This is very different from the other line, where the other line was you're down a pawn and you have a lot of space and activity. This one, you're going much more slowly, but it goes both ways. They don't really have much going on. They don't have any threats. We play knight f1 on our next move. They need to be playing something active right now, but what active moves do they have? They're not in a position to play actively. Their choice of an active move was bishop g4, and then bishop h5, and they're hoping that the pin leads to something, and that's fine, that's solid, but it's nothing worrisome. I'll tell you guys the most popular move here. It's a6, and there is an idea here that they're going to play knight a5 and try to get rid of your light squared bishop. That is very normal in these Italian game lines. They want to get rid of your light squared bishop because that's a very strong piece. They would be extremely happy to trade off that knight for the bishop, and generally speaking, you do not want to allow that. So if you see a6, you want to play bishop b3 so you can retreat to c2 if they attack. So, and the reason you wait till they play a6 to do that, by the way, is, say we go back a move and they play knight a5 right here, you could put the bishop on b5 instead, and then if you need to, retreat this way. So it was unnecessary previously. And then now that they've played a6, if we don't play bishop b3, then their next move, knight a5, will keep us from being able to escape from being captured. So here, we will play bishop to b3. If they follow through with knight a5, it's a waste of their time. We play bishop c2, and then if their pieces are on a5 and c5, we're threatening b4 with a fork. So really not a great move if they play knight a5 now. We've basically prevented that. And now here, most of the time, people play h6. So they're playing these pawn moves, and they're good and solid, but it's nothing of any concern. It's very slow and passive for the most part. And basically, we're going to go forward with what we wanted to do, knight f1. I'll put in the most common moves for black. Right here, it's b5. And now we're going to continue our plan of going knight to g3. And if they allow you to capture this bishop, you absolutely want to. We'll say, for example, they play, let's say they play a5. That seems understandable enough. We're going to take the bishop, and they're going to recapture. Because that was the whole point of playing knight g3, and we're going to take the bishop. They're going to recapture. And we got rid of a light squared bishop. If we get rid of a knight for a bishop, that tends to be good early on in the game. And later on, that would be beneficial. We'd rather have bishops than knights in the endgame. And here, we're opening things up in the center. Now we could play d4. This knight no longer being pinned allows d4 to be played. We take, likely move the bishop here. And we've got total control of the center. The only thing they really have going for them is a couple of pawns on a5 and b5, which we can neutralize with a quick a4. So those pawns are going to do nothing. Maybe they push here. No big deal. No big deal. We have more space than them. We can develop the bishop to here. Bring our rook over to c1. It's a very, very pleasant position for us to be playing. So that is the idea. We go all the way back here to knight g3. If they allow us to take the bishop, that is what we are playing for. So most people are going to drop back to g6, as they should. Stay out of the way. And now we're going to follow through, keep the pressure on the bishop with knight h4. And now this time, it's not just a trade we're threatening. There's no trade. We are threatening to straight up win the bishop, right? A random a5 move. Take the bishop. This pawn on f7 is pinned to the king by our bishop, so they cannot recapture. We've just won a piece. So now they absolutely have to do something about this. They could move the king to unpin the pawn, but then we're totally okay with taking the bishop if we'd like to. Most people will move the bishop again to h7, and we can look back on this in retrospect now. When they played bishop g4 to pin our knight in the first place, how did that work out for them? It turns out that was a bit of a waste of time, because the bishop just retreat. It became a target. All right, if we can turn their best pieces into targets and then neutralize them, then, I mean, look at this. This was once a good piece. Now it looks terrible. It's not going anywhere. It's out of the game. We've completely neutralized one of their best pieces. And from here, we can keep the pressure on them as well. We're going to bring our queen out to f3. And we're looking to bring a knight to f5 pretty soon. That's a good outpost for the knight. And notice where all of our pieces are aimed. Right? We have the bishop aimed this way. This bishop is aimed this way. The knights are aimed at the king. All of our pieces are coordinated very well, working well together. So say they go a5 here, and that's very, very common. We put a knight on f5. Say they follow through with a4. That feels pretty likely. We're getting into what once started as a slow and solid and very nice all-around opening. We're suddenly getting some good attacking chances here, and we could even sacrifice our bishop. And if they capture here, then it should just be game over after queen to g3 check. Move the king, queen g7 is checkmate. If they block with the bishop, we can capture because this pawn is still pinned to the king by our bishop. So the only move here is knight to g4, and then queen g5 to block the check. But then after knight takes h6, very nice move here. Queen can't capture because it's pinned to the king. They have to move the king to get out of the check, and then we take their queen. So that works out extremely well for us. If they capture this bishop, we're going to capture on g7. And we have similar ideas with our queen coming to the g file, and then just lots of play here. They could quickly get checkmated, or they could quickly lose material. Either way, we're pretty happy with it, so that's extremely pleasant. The likely move is rook e8 to make sure they save the rook. Now, queen g3, they're in a whole lot of trouble here. In fact, knight h6 threatens checkmate in 1, so they probably just take the knight. Not really sure what they're doing now. This looks terrible. Completely terrifying. It looks like they're about to get checkmated if they don't find the best moves. So, extremely good chances there. And we got this by not really doing a whole lot of craziness. Let me come back to around move 7. Alright, so we start in a position like this, and the plan in this D3 or D3 and C3 system is bring the knight to D2. We're gonna soon play rook E1, knight F1, knight G3, and a lot of pressure on the bishop that they put on G4. We throw in H3 first so that when the bishop goes to H5, and most of the time it's going to, when we bring our knight around, eventually we go to G3. Now notice it's not just a straight line that we follow, right? We're having to find other moves in the process, and we don't just go knight F1, knight G3 immediately. And back here they play A6. This is a reminder. You still need to watch what your opponent is doing. It's not just about your plan. You still have to keep an eye out for what your opponent is up to, because you don't want to end up playing, say, knight F1 right now and allowing knight A5. And this would be playable. You would have to find the best moves to keep the advantage, and that involves playing into a strange looking position, and you have to know to take the bishop and not the knight in this position. But this changes the general plan basically. You can still go here, but not having a bishop on c4 is going to make it a lot different because you no longer have the pin on f7. So it would be playable still, but you would rather avoid it and make it easy for yourself long term. After all, why give your opponent any chances and let them do what they want to do if you don't have to do that? Limit your opponent's options and play forward with your plan. Now, I'm going to go back to the position where we play d3, because it's not always the case that they're going to play into it that exact way. There's a good chance they play d6 on this move or the next move. Sometimes people castle first and then play d6. It doesn't really matter. You're likely, large majority of the time, reaching this position, or bishop g4 here is more popular. But if they castle first, say we castle and they castle, there's still a very good chance they're going to bring the bishop to g4, because that seems to be the only idea people come up with in these lines. It's just overwhelmingly popular in all continuations. So what we can do is still play knight d2. All right, and the most popular move is, again, by far, bishop g4. And then we go, we go h3 first, actually. h3, and then rook e1, knight f1, knight g3, that whole thing again. It transposes into the same idea. All right, and then back here, what if they play, third most common move, h6? Well, you still go knight d2. Common move here is castling, rook e1. They still play into bishop g4. We're getting the same thing, aren't we? It's the same idea. This is the system, the setup that we are going for in this c3, d3 Italian game. All right, it's very nice and solid. If you don't get the attacking chances, it's very easy to play, and you have very, very little to worry about. You just have to remember a few key things, such as if they play a6, play bishop b3 and get out of the way. Another general tip would be to not bring your bishop out to g5. It's playable, but you don't get the same plan. You would rather play with the knights over here and just leave the bishop watching from the distance. It doesn't need to go pin their knight. Usually when you go bishop g5 to pin the knight, you have a knight on c3 to go in and help with the attack, but that does not exist in this line. You're not going for that idea anymore. So that's the main idea in the c3, d3 continuation. Let me go all the way back to move 4. And this is where you have the two extreme options. You can play d4 with the more exciting way to play. Generally, if you play the exciting lines, you end up being down a pawn. So d4 takes, check, knight c3, they capture, you castle. If they play incorrectly, you could quickly get into a winning position. If they play all the best moves, then you're going to be down a pawn, but have plenty of space to work with. If that sounds appealing to you, this is a great line for you to try out. If you don't like that, d3 would be a good option. You go d3, often they will play d6. If you wanted to, as a side note, you could throw in b4, a4, or a4 first and try to trap their bishop back here. I would tell you it's not really worth your time unless you're playing bullet and you can pre-move it, and hopefully they just move too fast and miss the idea. In general, though, if you want to play for a better idea, I would suggest you castle here. At some point, they're going to pin your knight, in which case you go knight d2, h3, or if they castle first, you go knight d2. You do want to let the bishop come to g4. It's not a problem for you at all. All right, you go knight d2. Again, if they capture the knight, not a problem. They'll castle most of the time. You play h3. If they retreat the bishop anywhere except h5, it's not even a problem for you. Let's say they go to e6 or d7 or even c8. Well, c8 and d7 are just out of the game, for one. e6 offers you a trade, and I think you would just quickly expand on the queen side instead, and you're just taking up more space, so that works as well. Most of the time, though, they will play bishop h5, and you play rook e1, clearing the path for the knight to come to f1, and soon after g3. And once again, remember, if they play a6, you need to throw in bishop b3, and basically all your pieces get to good squares. It's very nice and solid. You have little to nothing to worry about, and it can still turn into something really, really amazing for you. So that was the Italian game. I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope you enjoyed. Congratulations on learning how to play it. If you're interested in learning how to counter the Scotch game, by the way, then click on the video that should appear somewhere on the screen. I don't know where. And there you go. That's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you have questions, post them in the comments. I will answer you, and I will see you in the next video.